So I guess I get to be the start and the end. By the way, did you all enjoy your fire drill? Yeah, we planned that special so you could get a little fresh air before we went on. So how many of you are aware of the NIH Precision Medicine Initiative? Raise your hand. All right, good. So if you've sat through the webinars and all of that stuff, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today are things that you've heard before. But I wanted to kind of update you on what probably is the hottest and certainly one of the most exciting new areas. Do we have a clicker? Okay, over here. Activities that go on. So I apologize, I'm too short to do this, but I can't.
I did find one.
Okay. Anyway, so why even thinking about a kind of a national effort to really understand the impact of precision medicine? And I think that as the NIH really brought people together and began to do the white papers that really underlay this activity, as we know, despite literally, 100 years of working, many of the diseases, both common and rare diseases that we have, lack effective preventive strategies as well as good focused treatments. And so we really have relatively little data to understand something that we've now talked about for a good 3 or 4 decades, which of course is personalized medicine. How do we really begin to look at the characteristics that make an individual unique and be able to look at those to understand how we get the most effective treatment at the right time for the right person? I think the second issue that's really been increasingly a problem is that participants in studies no longer want to be a passive involvement in the study where we do studies on them, but in fact they want to be actively engaged in the design of the study. And so with the advent of patient advocacy groups, and in fact groups like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, which in fact has driven multiple new drugs and diagnostics for a kind of genetic childhood disease, you're really seeing a change in the approach to really thinking about how to work together. And then lastly, of course, and one of the reasons, as I said, that the Clinical and Translational Science Award Program was designed at the NIH is the fact that not only are there massive translational gaps in that kind of that T1 area, taking it from discovery to the bedside, but as importantly, there's a huge gap in that T2 to T4 part of the translational syndrome, which is in fact that we don't implement these things into practice very effectively. So the Precision Medicine Initiative really tried to put together all of these areas of concerns and challenges and said, how can we do this and do this more effectively? And is the time appropriate to do this now? And the answer is, in fact, it is. Because only a decade ago, you can see that the cost of sequencing a human genome was enormous. So when we did some of our earlier work in the Women's Health Initiative at looking at the genetic variants associated with risk for cardiovascular disease, for risk for osteoporosis and osteoporotic fracture, it was tens of millions of dollars to do cohorts and case control studies that unfortunately were relatively underpowered. Now we can actually look at a whole genome sequencing and get it back for between $1,000 and $5,000. What took literally months to years to be able to do whole genome sequencing is now down to 24 hours or less in some of the high throughput laboratories. And of course, we have new ways to be able to really understand environmental influences, the lifestyle things, through the use of smartphones and other technology, and the real growth of sensors. And so this really is an opportunity to really bring all of that data together to really advance an understanding of the gene-environment interactions in order to be able to move things forward. In the development of the Precision Medicine Initiative, the NIH and the working group laid out a number of core values. And the first of those is that this participation in the PMI is actually open to anybody who's interested in being involved. So irrespective of race, ethnicity, age, or illness or health. It really was embracing a large cohort of individuals who were willing to contribute to understanding the genetic underpinnings and the environmental underpinnings of health and disease. The second is it's absolutely critical for us to represent the diversity, and that includes not only the traditional racial and ethnic diversity that we think about, but socioeconomic diversity, the diversity of cultures, as well as looking within both families as well as kind of non-traditional family units. The third part is that patients, or in fact the participants, are actually active partners. So we no longer participate, we collaborate and we partner together and really drive not only the way the study is going to be designed and implemented, but in fact the interpretation of the results and the ability to give that information back, which really leads into the fourth, that God bless you, that it's absolutely critical in this initiative that we give that information quickly back to the participants, that we actually have a really a social compact with the participants, that they have access to the study information, the data about themselves to allow them to make informed decisions, whether it be about preventive strategies, choices for treatment, or simply to understand things about themselves. These need to be open data sources. I think the fields of genetics and genomics have done this better than anybody, and certainly dbGaP I think is a wonderful example as we get more sophisticated in analytic approaches and continue to phenotype more deeply. We can go back multiple times to the same data sets and combine the data sets when they're harmonized to be able to answer questions that we couldn't before. So that openness of data sharing is critical for this. But as we just heard in our last talk, doing this within a framework of data security so that we protect the PHI is critical, and the lessons learned I think will help to inform genomic and precision medicine initiatives for years to come. So what all of you need to be aware about is that this is an initiative, when complete in the next couple of years, are things that you can actually leverage to drive your scientific questions forward. So this is a real opportunity to start thinking right now and to feed back to the requests for information, the RFIs and things like that. What kinds of things would you like to see that are going to be collected? What kinds of ways would you like to do this? Because there will be follow-up RFAs and other things like that that will actually allow you to use this as a scaffold to be able to put clinical trials or to be able to do observational studies or additional measures, much like we've done over the past 25 years, which means I started it at the age of 10 in the Women's Health Initiative. So the real charge, when President Obama announced the Precision Medicine Initiative during the State of the Union last year, so this is really a 1 year, and for NIH, this is rapid fire movement in terms of going from an idea to an RFA with grants due in 2 weeks, is to develop a vision for the Precision Medicine Initiative Cohort Program to really create a longitudinal national research cohort of 1 million or more volunteers. And so some of the things that they struggled with early on was to determine whether they should leverage existing cohorts like the Women's Health Initiative, where we have data on 161,000 women over 25 years prospectively, deep phenotyping. It was a population-based kind of recruitment study, and we have genotyping. We have GWAS in more than 32,000 individuals now. We have whole genome sequencing in more than 20,000 individuals, and we will have whole genome sequencing in 14,000 individuals within the next couple of months as part of the NHLBI TopMed initiative going forward, which is part of the Precision Medicine Initiative as well. Or do we start from scratch and create a brand new cohort, or do we combine these things together? Do we have this volunteer cohort that's going to kind of look broadly across the population and then supplement it together with these well-phenotyped cohorts, many of which are disease-based, in order to be able to have a larger way of looking at that? And how do we harmonize the data between these? How do we actually come up with recruitment strategies that are going to bring in the rich diversity of the U.S. population? Things that we often don't do very well in our current approaches. And then what kind of data do we want to include? How deeply do we want to phenotype? What kind of measurements do we want to have? How are we going to make sure that they're done consistently? And then how do we really maximize this in terms of the policies that are there? So when looking at whether it's really possible to recruit this and whether there was an interest among the U.S. population for doing it, the foundation of NIH actually put out a large public opinion poll to really understand, does the American public actually have an interest in moving this forward? And as you can see, more than 3/4 of individuals that actually responded to the opinion poll said that a cohort that's widely representative of the U.S. population should definitely be done. And almost half the people answered the opinion poll said that they would consider joining such a cohort and contributing not only their genomic, but their health information, as well as doing additional testing. When asked why would they do this, this is something that resonates, as I said, from recruiting large populations in cohort studies that I've done most of my career. And it's that about 3/4 or more of individuals really want to do it because they're interested in having that feedback. What did you learn about me? How can I take this forward and how do I move it? But as importantly is the altruism. People really want to make a difference. And so if they understand what the message is, why we're trying to do this, and if we're really working together in partnerships, that recruitment or enrollment and retention becomes extremely high. And that really is followed up by the fact that almost 3/4 of them said we want to be active partners in asking the questions and helping to answer them. So what are the scientific opportunities that are going to be available at the end of this? Ray asked me the other day when we were talking about this on the telephone, did I think that this was really something that was going to move science forward? And I think it is, and I think it is in ways that we might not even realize today kind of what its value would be. So it can be from the very straightforward things like having much better quantitative estimates of risk for a range of diseases by really being able to look at both environmental exposures, genes, and then gene-environment interactions. It could be looking at kind of really understanding now on a polygenic rather than kind of our more monogenic approach, how individual variations in response might differ based upon kind of the entire genetic profile rather than looking at a single SNP by SNP interaction. It would also really to advance areas of looking at new biomarkers for both risk prediction as well as actually absence of disease. And there's a huge effort, for example, to understand, are there genetic predictors of longevity? Why do some people live into their 9th and their 10th decades either free of disease or in fact doing very well with their disease? So understanding both aspects of the spectrum, we've often been very almost pessimistic in looking at the severity of disease when in fact the absence of disease may be every bit as important and in fact also is likely to be genetically controlled. And then to be able to actually use mobile health technologies to be able to get additional information to really leverage the data that one can get from sensors and things like that, now to understand activity, sleep, wake cycles, light exposure, and almost anything else that you're interested in. It might allow us to actually look at disease categories better. And certainly even in the area of GWAS, as certainly Wolfgang knows, some of the newest advances have been rather than thinking about a single disease, in fact, when one has a genetic variant that either upregulates or downregulates a pathway, one should actually look at the range of phenotypes because, in fact, it's likely that in different individuals that something with that where that pathway is important may express, and there's more similarities and differences in that. And so Marilyn Ritchie's work in FNIH has really changed that we think about things, which, in fact, biologically many of us already knew were good ways to look about that. And that is important. How do we return results in a way that's meaningful, both for individuals as well as their health providers? And how do we do this in a policy way so it doesn't adversely affect things like employment, insurance, or other areas? And so being able to think about this for the methodologic things that will move forward, for really being able to look at sensors and environmental health, for moving the areas of genomics and genetics forward, and of course to be able to leverage this to look at targeted therapies are just some of the scientific opportunities that I think all of us should think about taking advantage after this is funded. So the goal within the next year is to begin to enroll this cohort. As said, it's estimated that like 1 million or more volunteers from across the United States that broadly reflect the diversity of the U.S., with a particular focus as well as in family members. And so the focus in children in this has been really bringing them together as dyads or triads together with their parents and siblings to be able to do some family studies within studies of large heterogeneous populations. As previously noted, there will probably be oversampling of certain underrepresented minority groups in order to really be able to move some of the science forward. This will be a longitudinal cohort, which means you can't opt out. It's going to be an opt-in, because you're going to want to follow prospectively what happens in an individual's health. So the goal of this is not a 5-year study, but that this will be 10 and 20 and 30 years, much like the strength of both Framingham and the Women's Health Initiative have to really be able to understand things moving forward. And it will use both pragmatic data collection through the electronic health records, as well as surveys and examinations to be able to more deeply phenotype the cohort at baseline and then at yet to be determined intervals along the course. There's 2 opportunities for enrollment. One will be through health provider organizations, and in fact, short of the Kaiser system, for the most part, this has really been consortia of health provider organizations going in together to put applications in to actually enroll across the covered lives in those organizations, but there'll also be the opportunity for direct volunteers. So there's going to be a wide campaign to make people aware of this, and then they can simply respond that they want to join, and then they will come in and give their biospecimens and fill out their surveys and have their examinations and be part of this as well. And a huge amount, much like PCORI has done, the participant engagement throughout every aspect from governments through implementation and the development of the design. Why use this? Because obviously this is large and diverse, but by using health provider organizations supplemented with direct volunteers, it appears to be less costly and much easier than trying to do representative sampling. And for those of you who know, for example, studies like NHANES, even an attempt to do representative sampling across large populations isn't exactly representative of the entire diversity of the United States. We'll be able to determine much better estimates of the effect in association, and by having sizes of more than 1 million individual with phenotyping through the electronic health record of all health conditions, we hope that'll be a much better powered study in order to be able to look at both health and disease. As we said, there's going to be a real effort on focusing on underserved and underrepresented populations, and that certainly includes reaching out into the federal health quality organizations that provide care to some of our poorest individuals, to make sure that we actually are able to look at the impact of difficulty with access to care and how that can affect the underpinnings of disease, and it will combine together with the disease-based cohorts that have been genotyped and phenotyped in the past to really give us a very strong area. To date, the final decisions regarding the data that will be collected is not known. It really will be decided by the steering committee of the organizations that are successful in responding to the RFA for being part of the Precision Medicine Initiative. But again, I would encourage you to follow along on the PMI site because there really is a lot of opportunity to give them feedback of the types of things that you think will move your science forward and allow you to ask questions. And so it'll include everything from self-reported measures to baseline examinations, structured clinical data through the electronic health record, the collection of baseline biospecimens as well as biospecimens at some points or in some subsets of individuals longitudinally, and then a large effort in terms of collecting mobile health as well. It doesn't want to turn. And so the concept really is that you bring these groups of individuals, whether it be through the health provider organizations like the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, or the direct volunteers who come in, and then they'll actually have the collection of all those, and all that data will be kept together in a very large data set, if you can imagine putting all of this together for 1 million people and then longitudinally continuing to move it forward. Not only will data flow in, but data will flow out. And so as we get that information back, we'll actually be giving reports back to the participants and to their providers so that they can utilize this, in fact, to make the most important decisions regarding healthcare choices. And for all of you, the data will be widely open and accessible. So by simply having a data use agreement and putting in kind of designs of studies that one or analyses that you might like to pursue, you'll have the opportunity to either get biospecimens or, in fact, to get the data that's already been collected to move some of your questions forward. So one of the things are that individuals can actually opt in or opt out at getting their information back, depending on their preference. They can get individual level data so they can find out exactly what's happening. They can look at their data relative to large populations that are similar to them, and then they will get aggregated results as well as ongoing study updates. I'm going to move on only because I have to be up at the college in a second. So this study will start within the next year, as I said. There is a run-in phase. It's actually the feasibility phase. And then by late 2019, the entire million plus cohort should be fully enrolled. The RFA for this, as I said, is actually a 2-part RFA, so it has a feasibility and then the full phase. And it's really focused on health provider organizations, the Ohio State University, together with the organizations and the Cleveland Clinic, Case Western, the CTSA there, as well as the University of Cincinnati, are actually working together to put in a statewide. And we really build this up on top of the Ohio Clinical Trials Collaborative, something actually funded by Governor Kasich almost 2.5 years ago, which is to really create a statewide network that allows us to move forward. Some of the real advantages of this are we have a single reliant IRB across the state, so that we don't have to get IRB at multiple organizations. We only have to do one. We have standard operating procedures. We all use the same I2B2 Shrine as our connectors, so we actually have the feasibility and have linked together our electronic health records across the majority of those organizations, and we have a long-standing collaborative relationship that moves forward. So certainly, February 17th isn't a whole lot of days away. And we're responding to this in a 12-page proposal to put all of it together. But we're responding for one main reason. We're really responding because of all of you. That if we're an active participant, if we are successful in our application, that gets us a seat at the table to actually move forward. And by doing that, we can actually really develop the precision medicine to kind of address the questions that we want to do. So I invite all of you to continue to work together with us. If you have ideas, if you have things, we'd be happy to try to hook you up with the right individuals. But certainly, I think this is one of the exciting new things moving forward, and something I think that can move all of your science logarithmically over the years to come. Thank you, and thank you all of you for coming to this. I'm going to turn it back over to Ray, who I think is going to have a few last follow-up words for discussion, and I'm going to run up to the college and negotiate some budgets.